My mom denied food to a kid when we were all trapped. 4 days later, she tried to steal from him, but the tables turned and her greed was exposed. I was helping as a student teacher for the 7th grade field trip when the bus journey home went bad. The privileged students laughed and made fun of scholarship student Eli Parker in the back. Kid murmured, "Did you see his shoes?" "My dad says mom cleans houses," said another. "Eli probably doesn't even have a dad," Lila Whitmore laughed. Up from my seat. "Hey, that's enough. Let's be kind to each other." Ms. Harper rolled her eyes from her seat. "Oh, relax, kids will be kids." Maybe if he wasn't so strange, they'd genuinely like him. The other parents joked. Eli gazed out the window, trying not to hear. When we entered the mountain tunnel, the bus rocked with a huge rumble. Dust from boulders falling behind and in front of us filled the tunnel, making all the youngsters scream. After it cleared, massive rubble blocked both ends, trapping us. Radio signal was absent when the driver attempted. Our phones too. "Don't worry," Mrs. Whitmore said. "They'll have us out in an hour." Yet an hour and 2 passed. In the evening, youngsters were famished. Mrs. Whitmore brought out lunch's leftover pizza boxes. She distributed them to each child, ignoring Eli. "Wait," I said. "Eli needs to eat too." He didn't pay for the field trip lunch," she complained. "No payment, no food." Hearing this was unbelievable. "Are you serious? We're trapped, and you're worried about $4? I offered Eli a piece. Mrs. Whitmore smacked my hand. I said no. Everyone else's parents paid. Why should he get special treatment? The other parents crossed their arms to support her. Eli took out water bottles, baby carrots, and snacks from his rucksack. "It's okay, ma'am. I have my own food." The group split shortly, me, Eli and the driver versus the privileged kids and parents. The privileged kids brought chips, candy, and drink and played on their phones while the parents claimed they'd leave shortly. They were wrong. We remained trapped for hours. Although we didn't hear drilling until day 1.5, we knew they were having problems removing the unstable material. By then, kids and parents who hadn't rationed were fighting. Mrs. Whitmore said assistance was imminent while her daughter cried for her phone charger. On day 2, the youngsters were too hungry and fatigued to cry or stir. As optimism faded, Eli rose up, opened his rucksack and carefully divided everything into tiny halves. He passed them to his students as he walked. "We can last. 5 bites and 1 sip per day," he whispered. I saw these pampered youngsters come to him with respect and follow his advice after mocking him for not having pizza. Eli got a fever on day 3 of being detained, just when things were improving. Everyone could hear his labored breathing. "Let's take his rations," Mrs. Whitmore grinned. "He's not going to make it anyway. The rest of us need to survive." What I heard was unbelievable, but what occurred next stunned me even more. Every child stood between them, gazing at her. "He saved us!" cried a girl. "He shared everything he had when you wouldn't even give him pizza." Another child said, "You're a bad person." Her daughter concurred. Several parents participated, while the remainder shrugged and ordered her to stop. Even in poor light, Mrs. Whitmore's face was flushed. "Have you all lost your mind? He gave you a few drops of water, and now you're on his side?" "Oh yeah? And what did you give us?" "Nothing," I said. Her lips opened, then closed when she couldn't argue. After she left, the kids returned to their rations and gave Eli little bits. One female handed him her last crackers. With the extra water they offered, I cooled his fever with wet cotton for hours. The kids took turns dozing, with some staying awake to watch Eli. Then light burst through. Rescue professionals looked in and were ready to carry us out one by one, but the kids wouldn't move until Eli was out. However, Mrs. Whitmore cornered me after we left. "This isn't over," she yelled. She didn't realize that a conflict with me meant a class war. Mrs. Whitmore was ignored as paramedics pushed by her with a stretcher and medical bags to Eli. 2 knelt alongside him as a third took his pulse and temperature. Eli tried to dismiss them by stating he was all right, but his voice was nervous. The youngsters surrounded the stretcher, refusing to move when paramedics told them to. A tiny girl held Eli's hand tightly. Lila Whitmore blocked her mother's view with her arms crossed, as she always did. Other kids formed a tight circle around Eli, and I watched the paramedics exchange glances until one smiled and said they may ride near to the ambulance if they stayed careful. Mrs. Whitmore stared at me from 15 feet away with her arms crossed, twisting my gut. Some parents ignored her, looking at the ground or their phones. 2 parents who'd helped her in the tunnel stood over to the side, humiliated and talking. The paramedics carried Eli onto the stretcher, and the kids went with him to the ambulance, holding his hands and promising him he'd be okay. I followed them, and one paramedic inquired whether Eli was riding with someone since he was a child. I mentioned his mom was 1 hour and 30 minutes away and he shouldn't be alone. The paramedic nodded and helped me enter the ambulance as the youngsters waved farewell through the windows. We moved with sirens as the doors closed. As the temperature read dangerously high, I saw the two paramedics quickly insert an IV line into Eli's arm. Despite his heat, they blanketed him, saying his body temperature regulation was incorrect. Eli kept slipping in and out of awareness, closing his eyes many times before opening them again. Every time he woke up, he mumbled about dividing the crackers evenly and inquiring if everyone had a glass of water. One paramedic furrowed his eyebrows as I gently described Eli's rationing scheme. The paramedic shook his head and murmured about courageous youngsters. Eli appeared to struggle with each inhalation. The third bag dripped fluids into his arm while the paramedics watched his vital signs on a little gadget that beeped regularly. I held Eli's hand without the IV and told him everything will be okay. He faintly clutched my fingers before closing his eyes. Although the vehicle trembled after a bump, personnel focused on stabilizing Eli. When we arrived at the hospital, everything blurred. Once we entered the ER, at least 4 scrubbed staff members surrounded Eli's stretcher. They rushed him away quickly, yelling out medical phrases I didn't understand, and a nurse brought me to the waiting room. I felt lost and worthless as they vanished behind double doors. Another nurse with a clipboard asked for my contact details and patient relationship. I told him I was his field trip student instructor and that his mom was on her way but had a long drive. After taking detailed notes, the nurse asked me to narrate what happened. I told her about the tunnel collapse and Eli's day 3 illness. I received a bottle of water and a warm blanket around my shoulders. I opened the water bottle with shaky hands, unaware that I was chilly. I needed the nurse to screw off the cap. I sat in an uncomfortable plastic waiting room chair and gazed at the floor, not sure if I was shaking from the chilly tunnel or from all that had transpired. After 4 days of low emergency illumination, fluorescent lights were too bright. Others in the waiting area stared at me because I appeared filthy, weary, and coated with tunnel dust. I drank little sips of water and tightened the blanket to stop my hands from shaking. I heard heavy footsteps and saw Mark Sullivan approaching. I could see his tiredness on his face as he sighed on the chair next to me. Mark informed me he alerted the rescue coordinator about the tunnel incident. He told them how Mrs. Whitmore refused to share food and suggested they take Eli's rations when he got sick. He also informed them of how all the youngsters defended Eli against their parents. Mark stated the rescue coordinator took notes and sounded worried. I nodded when he asked if I was okay, but I wasn't sure. We sat silently for a while, too exhausted to communicate. Suddenly the waiting room doors opened, and a woman raced in, searching for me. Maria Parker was scared. She was crying, and a towering man, Carlos Ramirez, appeared behind her. Maria grabbed my hands and asked where her kid was and whether he was okay as they ran over. At the tunnel collapse and over the 4 days, I stood up and told everything calmly. Her face showed fear when I described the collapse and being trapped, gratitude when I explained how Eli shared his food with everyone, and anger when Mrs. Whitmore refused to share the pizza and later suggested they take Eli's rations. Carlos placed a hand on her shoulder as she tightened her grip on mine, his expression black with fury. She asked me to repeat Mrs. Whitmore wanting to remove food from her ill kid, like she couldn't believe it. I repeated it word for word, watching her digest the harshness. Carlos said something in Spanish that I didn't understand, but his tone was angry. Maria thanked me again for protecting her kid in the ambulance. She said she should have protected him and been there. I told her Eli was the bravest tunneler and protected everyone. That helped some. We waited together and Carlos held Maria while she sobbed onto his shoulder. Approximately 15 minutes later, a blue scrubs doctor summoned Eli through the double doors. Everyone sprang up and ran. Doctor smiled and said Eli will be okay, but he needed to stay overnight for monitoring and IV fluids. He was terribly dehydrated and agitated by the fever, but with care, he would recover. Now Maria cried from relief, not dread. Her hands covered her face, and Carlos held her close. I watched them hug each other as the doctor waited. After speaking again, Maria thanked the doctor and then me, stating she didn't know what would have occurred without me. I told her Eli rescued himself by being compassionate while others weren't. We could visit Eli once the doctor situated him in a room. About 25 minutes later, more individuals came at the hospital. The older lady accompanying Principal Lawson looked professional, so I knew she was Dr. Reed, the school administrator. Both looked fatigued and serious, perhaps from the rescue operation and concerned parents all day. Principal Lawson approached me in the waiting room and requested a few minutes alone. Dr. Reed followed us to a quieter area, and I could tell by their looks that they'd heard something, presumably from Mrs. Whitmore knowing her. Principal Lawson requested me to recount the 4 days in the tunnel, so I took a big breath and began. Before the collapse, youngsters mocked Eli's shoes and family condition on the bus. I then described the tunnel collapse, terror, and Mrs. Whitmore's refusal to give Eli any remaining pizza since his parents hadn't paid for the field trip meal. While I spoke, Principal Lawson took notes in a little notebook. I told them about Mrs. Whitmore slapping my pizza slice, the group breaking in two, and Eli distributing his meticulously rationed goods on day 2. As I recounted the children's hunger and tiredness, Dr. Reed's jaw tightened. On day 3, Eli suffered a fever and Mrs. Whitmore advised taking his rations. I told them every youngster stood between them and Eli, branded her a nasty person, and forbade her from coming near him. That astonished the superintendent, who opened her eyes. I concluded by saying the kids demanded Eli be rescued first and had changed their mind about him. Principal Lawson stopped writing and glanced at me, inquiring about time and witnesses. I confirmed that Mark Sullivan and the other parents and kids observed everything. The principal said they were questioning adults and children individually to understand what happened. She requested me to write a formal statement for their records, and I obliged instantly since the kids needed the truth. I wasn't going to allow Mrs. Whitmore's narrative bury these children's lessons from that tunnel about compassion and doing the right thing. The principal thanked me and promised to contact me regarding the written statement in a few days. After checking on Eli with his mom, they departed, and I could breathe easier. Eli was stable and his mom was present, so I went home. Someone called out behind me as I walked to my car in the hospital parking lot. A woman running with a microphone and camera operator caught my attention. She identified herself as Rachel Collins from the local news station and said they heard about the spectacular rescue and wanted to discuss the tunnel incident. I declined to respond, saying Eli and the kids had been through enough and I didn't want to start a media circus. Rachel kept asking questions as I went faster to my car, but I just said I had no remark and wanted to go. I secured my car and watched her give up and go back to the hospital. I sat there for a minute trying to understand what occurred while I started the engine with shaking hands. Back at my place, I struggled with my keys and entered. My modest kitchen looked the same when I left on the field trip days before, but it felt different. After placing my purse on the counter, I stood still. I was smacked by everything at once. After my legs gave out, I sank onto the kitchen floor with my back to the cabinet. The tears flowed fast and strong, making breathing difficult. 4 days in the tunnel. Eli's fever. Face of Mrs. Whitmore as she recommended removing his meal. Kids standing between them. All of it weighed on my chest, cried till my throat ached and eyes swelled. After stopping, I stood up and cleaned my face in the sink. My phone kept lighting up on the counter then. I grabbed it, and my gut wrenched. 32 messages. I read them. "Am I okay?" my roommate asked. 3 other student instructors said they listened and supported me. Mom wants me to call her. Then came parental messages. This parent said I did the right thing by safeguarding all the kids. Another parent complimented me for opposing Mrs. Whitmore when no one else would. However, other messages appeared. A parent asked why I produced so much friction instead of honoring Mrs. Whitmore's parent-volunteer coordinator decisions. Another remark suggested I should have realized I was a student teacher. I made things worse by questioning the folks in control, someone wrote. Sitting at my modest kitchen table, I scrolled. Though most responses were positive, the critical ones lingered with me. My phone rang, and I jumped. Caller ID mentioned my university supervisor. My palm shook in response. It was wonderful that she inquired how I was. She then asked me to attend a meeting tomorrow morning. She spoke carefully and neutrally, like she was attempting to hide her thoughts. That scared me more than if she had told me I was in trouble or fine. I promised to be there, and she gave me a time. After we hung up, I opened a blank document on my laptop. I had to record everything in sequence while it was fresh. Beginning with the bus trip and youngsters mocking Eli. The tunnel collapsed. Mrs. Whitmore resisting pizza sharing. On day 2, Eli divided his supplies. 3rd day fever. Take him rations, Mrs. Whitmore suggests. Kids supporting him. The rescue. 2 hours were spent writing to memorize every detail and word individuals said. Though my hands cramped from typing, I continued. After finishing, the manuscript was 7 pages. I saved and shut off my laptop. I got another text on my phone. This came from an unfamiliar parent. She stated that her kid returned home saying Eli saved everyone and I was courageous. She replied, "Thank you for showing the kids what real kindness looks like." I wanted to feel better after reading it, but I kept worrying about tomorrow's meeting. What if I was expelled from student teaching? This was required for certification. My teaching career would be impossible without it. Standing up to Mrs. Whitmore may cost me all I worked for. I got ready to sleep. Even though it was early, I felt exhausted. My entire body hurt. However, I couldn't sleep when I closed my eyes. My mind kept repeating the tunnel. Eli's expression as Mrs. Whitmore smacked the pizza out of my hand, the youngsters becoming thinner and quieter each day, Mrs. Whitmore's smile when she proposed stealing Eli's food. However, I remembered the kids rising up, everyone between Eli and the parents. Even Mrs. Whitmore's daughter called her terrible. Kids learnt something vital in that tunnel. They learnt that wealth doesn't confer superiority. They learnt genuine character comes up in tough times. They learnt to fight for what's right when it's scary. I saw Eli exchanging his carefully rationed goods with students who had mocked him days before. Could have kept all for himself. Nobody would have faulted him, but he didn't. Ensured everyone has something. That's brave. How generous. Seeing the kids absorb that lesson was worth my meeting tomorrow. Misfortune. Finally fell asleep at 2:30 a.m. My alarm went off too early. I drove to college in my best business clothing. As usual, the campus appeared the same, but passing through the parking lot changed me. My supervisor's office was on the third level of the education building. I knocked, and she invited me in. I sat in the chair across from her desk at her request. She requested the entire story. Breathing deeply, I began speaking. I told her about the bullying on the bus before the collapse, Mrs. Whitmore pulling out the pizza and refusing to give Eli any because his mom hadn't paid, the group splitting into two sides, Eli sharing his supplies on day 2, his fever and Mrs. Whitmore's suggestion to take his rations, and the kids standing up and refusing to let anyone near him. The boss listened without interrupting. A tiny notepad held her notes. After I finished, she put her pen down and glanced at me. She claimed the school system asked me to stop student teaching while they investigated. My stomach fell quickly, making me dizzy. This might ruin my teaching certification. My supervisor may have seen my face since she swiftly added that it's usual protocol in any occurrence. She stated she thought I responded correctly and would include it in her report, but I couldn't return to the classroom until the inquiry was over. My voice was untrustworthy, so I nodded. She advised me to rest at home. She'd call me when she knew. I rose up and left her office without sobbing. My trek back to my car felt endless. Sat for a moment after entering. Then I checked my phone. 3 new messages. First, a dad thanked me for saving his son during the crisis. Second, a mom apologized for not criticizing Mrs. Whitmore during anything. Third, another parent said their daughter kept talking about how I stuck up for Eli. Read all 3 messages twice. After driving home, I tried to forget my future for the day. 2 days. I basically did schoolwork and distracted myself at my apartment. Then my phone rings. That was Principal Lawson. She invited me to school. Children were being interviewed about the tunnel incident and wanted me there. She said they were scared talking to authority figures. My presence may make them feel secure telling the truth. I agreed immediately. I got a morning time from her. I arrived at school 15 minutes early. The main office looked the same before the field excursion. My secretary smiled and pointed to the corridor. I saw Eli then. At the water fountain, he looked exhausted, yet healthy. Seeing me, he smiled slightly. He waved back. I suddenly had kids around me. All at once they talked about how afraid they were in the tunnel and how grateful everyone was safe. They pressed against me like they needed to verify my identity. Principal Lawson kindly returned the youngsters to the waiting area. She took me to her office. When we entered, a kind-eyed clipboard carrier stood up. She was presented by Principal Lawson as child psychologist Dr. Emily Shore. She made sure the students were comfortable during the interviews. I sat in a corner chair. Principal Lawson told me to be quiet during interviews, but the students could see me. That may help them relax. Blake, one of the loudest bus trolls of Eli, was the first to enter. He took the chair opposite Principal Lawson and Dr. Shore. He began speaking. He told them everything about the bus jokes, Mrs. Whitmore refusing to share the pizza, Eli splitting up his supplies, Mrs. Whitmore recommending they take Eli's food when he became sick, and all the kids getting up to stop her. Very honest and detailed. He didn't alter his appearance or leave anything out. The next youngster told the same story, then another. Though they remembered various specifics, the major events were the same. I listened in my corner to 7th graders be bolder and more honest than most adults. Then Lila Whitmore entered. She seemed anxious. She sat and plucked her nails. Dr. Shore asked her about the tunnel incident. The girl spoke softly. Eli was denied meals by her mother. She said the kids were becoming hungrier daily. She said Eli shared supplies. She mentioned her mother's advice to take his rations. She said she stood up with the other kids and called her mom terrible. After finishing, she cried, but not disturbed. She cried with relief, like a weight had been lifted. Principal Lawson thanked and released her. She approached me in the corner. She whispered that she explained her mother's behavior. She apologized for mocking Eli on the bus before everything transpired. I assured her that was acceptable and praised her honesty. Wiping her tears, she exited the office. Eli ranked last. He carefully sat down with his hands folded in his lap at the chair. Dr. Shore smiled and asked him to describe the tunnel incident. He began speaking quietly, yet clearly. He explained distributing his goods to everyone. He explained being ill, sweaty, and sleepy. He then said Mrs. Whitmore advised them to take his meal because he wouldn't make it. Dr. Shore leaned forward to inquire how he felt. Eli glanced down at his hands. He glanced up and stated he was afraid but grateful because the other kids stood up for him, which he had never experienced before. His voice wobbly as he uttered "pals." In her notepad, Principal Lawson wrote. Dr. Shore commended Eli for his bravery. His smile was tiny as he left the office. The room became silent when he closed the door. Principal Lawson put down her pen and faced me. She said the children's accounts matched each other and Mark Sullivan and my reports. Every youngster narrated a similar narrative with a few details that made it more plausible. The evidence showed that Mrs. Whitmore created a hostile and dangerous crisis scenario. Repercussions awaited her. Her words made my stomach flip with relief and worry. I departed when she stood and shook my hand. 2 days later, my phone rang when I was studying psychology for an exam. A school board member presented himself as Thomas Keller. He said they were holding an emergency meeting the next week to discuss parent volunteer policy and the tunnel collapse. He invited me to speak on my supervising student teaching experience. My phone-holding hand tensed. Even though my heart was beating, I agreed quickly. He thanked me and said the meeting was next Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. That week seemed like walking through sludge. Every night I sat at my modest kitchen table to compose my statement. I carefully wrote and deleted and rewrote. I couldn't focus on anything but the meeting, so my university schoolwork piled up. I kept thinking worst-case situations since my teaching career was precarious. My mom phoned twice that week to say she was proud of me. My roommate gave me cookies and coffee without asking. I received long texts from 2 education program pals indicating they would have done the same thing. That support helped more than anyone realized, yet I was still sick with worry most of the time. Monday night, my phone rang again. Maria Parker's voice was thick like sobbing, yet cheerful. Eli was invited to 2 friends' houses for playdates last week, she said. She insisted she couldn't believe it, and that he'd never been so accepted. She cried out when she said seeing him make true friends meant everything. Eli deserved everything and more, I told her. She thanked me again and hung up. Sitting there with my phone, I wondered whether all had been worth it. Tuesday night came too soon. I drove to the school board headquarters clutching the steering wheel. The parking lot was full. People packed the conference room walls and filled every seat. Parents from the field trip were among the instructors and newcomers. Local news cameras set up in the rear corner. In a black suit, Mrs. Whitmore sat in the front row alongside her husband. He looked angry like her. Her tunnel-supporting parents sat around the room, appearing uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact. I took a seat in the center to calm my breathing. The school board members made their way to the large table in front. On the middle seat, Thomas Keller brought the meeting to order. Principal Lawson presented the investigative results first. A huge packet of documents was in front of her. She meticulously read all the children's testimonies. She then discussed Mark's report, my remarks, and what the other adults saw. Board members would offer questions every couple minutes when she paused. When she said Mrs. Whitmore suggested they take Eli's meals while he had fever, several board members' faces altered. One woman opened her mouth. A guy shook his head slowly. The consistent testimonies were devastating, and you could feel the atmosphere change as people realized this wasn't simply an argument, but something more serious. Principal Lawson sat down, and Thomas Keller summoned me. I rose up shakily and moved forward. My folded statement was in my pocket, but I didn't read it. Instead, I concentrated on what the children taught me in those 4 days about courage, empathy, and doing the right thing, even when adults don't. I stated that as a teacher, I must safeguard all children and display ethical behavior, which I did in that tunnel. Despite shaking palms, I kept my voice firm. After I concluded, numerous audience members nodded. Mr. Whitmore's spouse stood before I could seat. He claimed to be her lawyer and argued that she was making logical resource management decisions amid a crisis. He said, "I undercut parental authority and made youngsters disdain their parents." His voice grew as he said. Keller raised his hand to stop him. He gently stated that stealing food from a sick child breaches any fair threshold. He said that the children's uprising against their parents revealed they had lost moral authority via their behaviors and weren't only being undermined. Some audience members started clapping before being instructed to stop. Then something unexpected happened. 3 parents rose. The first stated she wanted to support me and criticize Mrs. Whitmore. She felt guilty for staying mute in the tunnel when she should have spoken out. Tearing up, the second parent said virtually the same thing. Eli started sharing his meal when they all refused to help him, making the third parent humiliated. Seeing these privileged parents repent and recognize their sins silenced the room. Mrs. Whitmore went crimson and gazed straight ahead, ignoring everyone. Maria Parker stood next, and everyone looked at her. When she told her about Eli coming home after the first week of school and kids making fun of his shoes, she looked frightened but spoke clearly. She said she works 2 jobs to pay for their flat and his school supplies. She tries her hardest, but there's never enough money for the other kids' pricey footwear. She shakily stated Eli stopped informing her about school after the first week because he didn't want her to feel terrible about not being able to purchase things. She then recounted the night they were rescued from the tunnel and how Eli couldn't stop talking about his new friends, and how the kids helped him while he was unwell. She claimed it was the first time in years her kid was thrilled about school. She stared at Mrs. Whitmore when she emphasized that affluent families shouldn't need a life-threatening catastrophe to treat scholarship kids like people. Once she sat down, the room fell quiet, and I observed several individuals wiping their eyes. Thomas Keller cleared his throat and requested a board vote on the suggestions. He carefully reviewed each one, starting with removing Mrs. Whitmore from all school volunteer roles. Every board member raised their hand in support, and Mrs. Whitmore's rapid air intake could be heard throughout the room. They then passed laws mandating parent volunteers to take equity and inclusion and emergency procedure training before chaperoning field trips or helping in classrooms. That vote was unanimous. A scholarship fund in Eli's honor to help pupils pay for field trips and school supplies was voted on last. Principal Lawson said the money would ensure no child had to choose between school activities and home bills. After the vote passed overwhelmingly, the audience cheered until someone reminded them it was an official meeting. Thomas Keller thanked everyone for coming and said that all new regulations will take effect immediately. He ended the meeting with a gavel boom. 3 board members approached me as I gathered my stuff. After shaking my hand, the first one informed me they were suggesting to my institution that I return to student teaching immediately. The second board member praised my handling of a difficult circumstance and asked me to teach in their district after graduation. Thomas Keller was the last to approach and drew me away from the others. He looked me in the eye and said what I did in that tunnel was brave and precisely what their district needed in a teacher. He noted that standing up to wealthy parents is difficult, but necessary when a child's well-being is at issue. I thanked him and said I did what every teacher should. He grinned and remarked that sadly, not all teachers would have chosen the same. He shook my hand again and left to go to Principal Lawson. I felt lighter than in days as I headed out the door when Mrs. Whitmore emerged. Her face was crimson and she looked like she may burst. She said I wrecked her reputation in this town, cost her friendships, and nobody would trust her again. People stared at us as her voice grew louder. I started to answer, but 3 more parents intervened. One begged Mrs. Whitmore to leave me alone, and another advised her to take responsibility for her actions instead of blaming others. The third parent noted that I didn't make her advise withholding food from a sick child or refuse to share pizza. Mrs. Whitmore turned around and stormed to her car, her face turning redder. 3 parents turned to me and apologized for not opposing her sooner. One mom was ashamed that her children had more guts than she did to expose her their wrongdoing. After reaching my car, I sat there for a few minutes, exhaling and processing everything. When I started the engine, my hands were trembling from tiredness. Due of meeting replays, I drove home in autopilot, scarcely paying attention to the road. Once at my place, I flopped on my couch and stared at nothing. Then I checked my phone and found a university supervisor email. My heart raced when I opened it. The first sentence indicated I could return to student teaching next week, and I cried with relief. She concluded with a personal remark, stating she was proud of how I handled an impossible circumstance with integrity and concern for my kids. She wrote that the school board's recommendation was important and that she never disputed my tunnel decisions. After verifying the email 3 times, I relaxed for the first time since the rescue. The next morning, a stranger stopped me in the fruit area as I shopped for necessities. She knew me from tunnel rescue footage and wanted to shake my hand. She informed me her daughter was in 3rd grade at the same school and that she was delighted instructors like me would safeguard all students equally. I uncomfortably thanked her and left, but it occurred twice more before I reached the checkout. The checkout clerk mentioned watching the school board meeting on the local news last night. The station reported on the policy changes without naming anyone, but everyone in town understood what happened and who was involved. Walking around the store, I saw people pointing and murmuring. It seemed odd to be recognized for something so new and raw. Older man stopped me at the exit to say I did well. His grandson was in Eli's class. His grandson told him how Eli rescued everyone by sharing his food and how the youngsters learnt that kindness is more important than wealth. I returned to school the next Monday, apprehensive about how the pupils would react to me. I paused at the doorway of the 7th grade classroom because the students had produced a giant welcome back banner that covered the front wall. It said, "We missed you," in huge colorful letters, and every kid wrote their name, including Eli. After seeing me, the kids cheered and clapped, and Eli smiled from his place in the center of the room instead of in the front. Students went up to hug me and started raving about how delighted I was back and how dull the substitute instructor was. Watching Eli laugh with the youngsters seated next to him and how readily they included him in their discussion made my throat tighten. He looked at me and waved briefly. It was worth it to watch him finally belong instead of being marginalized. My cooperating teacher took me to her classroom for lunchtime conversation. She says she heard everything at the tunnel and school board meeting. She praised my moral bravery and said teaching is more than lesson plans and exam scores. She said many instructors must choose between what's easy and what's right, and I passed that exam when it counted. She noted that she had taught for 14 years and witnessed many student teachers who knew their curriculum but didn't realize that defending pupils often requires standing up to strong individuals. She sent a good reference letter for my certification portfolio and was delighted to have me in her classroom. I spent so much time thinking that addressing Mrs. Whitmore would damage my teaching career that her remarks meant more to me than she probably understood. Over the following few weeks, Eli transformed in ways that appeared almost magical, but I knew it was just him feeling comfortable enough to be himself. He began raising his hand in class and always gave intelligent, well-reasoned responses. Other youngsters asked him to be their group project partner because they trusted his leadership and recalled how he managed the tunnel ration sharing. In the first month I was back, he was asked to 2 birthday parties, and his mom told me he spent an hour choosing gifts to show his pals he cared. Eli was readily included in recess chats and activities, changing the classroom dynamic. One lunchtime, Lila Whitmore and Eli's gang were giggling over something. The transformation wasn't charity or pity, but true friendship based on respect garnered over their darkest 4 days. While her classmates left for their buses one day, Lila Whitmore waited. She nervously wanted to talk to me at my desk. I answered her yes, and she apologized again for her bullying before the tunnel collapsed. She stated she had been thinking about why she acted that way and realized she was just repeating what she heard at home without inquiry. She said she had grown used to her mom's comments regarding scholarship kids and poor households. But after seeing Eli save everyone by sharing his food while her mom refused to assist, she realized her mom was wrong in many things. She apologized for being harsh to Eli and stated she was trying to improve. I told her that admitting our mistakes and changing is what counts most, and I was proud of her for thinking critically instead of taking adults' advice. She laughed and said Eli was great once you got to know him and she wished she had realized that sooner. A few weeks later, the school system invited me to discuss their new volunteer training program. They wanted my perspective on equity and inclusion since I was in the tunnel seeing everything happen. 3 administrators and a curriculum expert asked me detailed questions about what went wrong and how to prevent it in a conference room. I mentioned how Mrs. Whitmore's beliefs regarding scholarship kids were obvious on the bus before the crash and became hazardous when resources were few. They took thorough notes and asked me to develop scenarios and discussion questions that would force participants to address their biases against economically diverse pupils. I was surprised to be treated like an expert as a student instructor. But then I understood that tunnel experience taught me more than any textbook. Over the next month, I worked with curriculum specialists to create role-playing activities and reflection prompts to have parent volunteers consider how they treat all children, not just wealthy ones. Real tunnel instances were used without naming anybody. We required every volunteer to sign an agreement stating that they would treat every kid with decency and respect regardless of family income. The final 7-page training program contained video scenarios and small group conversations, and the school board authorized its immediate district-wide deployment. The thank you note came in my campus mailbox between courses on Tuesday afternoon. Maria Parker wrote me a little message on flowery stationery saying she never believed her son would be so happy and welcomed. Eli was photographed at a birthday celebration with 5 other youngsters giggling off camera. I had never seen Eli smile so much during his initial weeks of student teaching, when he ate alone at lunch and kept his head down in the corridors. His mom said that he now talked about his pals continuously, and was invited to 2 more parties next month. She sobbed at the first invitation since she had watched him have lunch alone and return home from school without someone to play with on weekends for years. She said she was glad every day that I stood up for him when it counted and hoped I had improved her son's life. I glanced at that card in my teaching binder when I was having a bad day, or wondered if I was cut out for this job. Our literary conversation about a novel whose main character was bullied was observed by my university supervisor on Friday morning. I picked the book because I wanted the kids to relate it to their tunnel experiences and discuss true friendship and courage. The supervisor took notes in the back of the classroom as students discussed my questions in small groups. As I listened to each group, I was astonished by their insightful and mature comments. They discussed sticking up for others even when it's scary, and how the tunnel taught them that kindness is more important than popularity or wealth. Eli eagerly engaged in his group's conversation, and the other kids listened to him with respect, asking him questions and elaborating on his ideas. My supervisor drew me aside after class and said I was doing well. She observed, "Your ability to build an inclusive classroom community is remarkable for someone so early in their career." I related literature to actual events to help kids develop empathy and critical thinking. She then informed me that school districts would be happy to have a teacher with my integrity and guts, and that she was glad to have me as a student teacher. Her remarks meant everything since I had spent nights thinking that opposing Mrs. Whitmore might harm my job prospects. Principal Lawson emailed me about the scholarship fund 2.5 months after the tunnel collapse. The community response was enormous, with families giving because they were affected and wanted to help Eli. The charity had generated enough money for 12 kids' field trips next year, and many local companies had pledged monthly payments. Principal Lawson stated that the school board was contemplating increasing the fund to include school supplies and extracurricular expenses so scholarship kids wouldn't lose out. She said the tunnel collapse was painful but revealed how economic constraints affect pupils daily. The email contained images from a fund awareness event where Eli and many classmates spoke about include everyone, regardless of family income. I looked at the photo of Eli confidently speaking at a microphone in front of a crowd of adults and thought about how far he'd come from that timid boy in the front of the bus. Saturday morning coffee shop near campus was where I met Mark Sullivan. When he noticed me, he waved me to his table while reading a newspaper and drinking black coffee near the window. We talked for about an hour about what occurred and how our lives had altered since the rescue. I learned the school system had requested him to teach other bus drivers on emergency and difficult parent situations. He claimed the training included medical emergencies and dealing with parents who override driving authority or endanger youngsters. Mark said witnessing the youngsters oppose their parents in the tunnel gave him hope for the future. Despite driving school buses for 10 years and seeing entitled parents and tormented kids, he had never witnessed youngsters acquire moral bravery like Eli's peers. He was delighted we were there to help those youngsters when they needed grown-ups at their side. He shook my hand and advised me to continue in teaching since the profession required individuals who knew that safeguarding pupils sometimes involves standing up to strong people before we left the coffee shop. In late spring, Lila Whitmore joined the school's peer mentoring program and requested work with younger scholarship students. Her instructor stopped me to inform me about the change she saw. She claimed Lila Whitmore was one of the most empathic and inclusive kids in her class, often welcoming new students and correcting nasty comments. The instructor said the youngster openly discussed the tunnel experience and how it showed her mom was incorrect about impoverished households. She began to doubt other things her parents stated, rather than embracing them as truth. The instructor claimed she'd never seen a pupil change so much in so little time, and she thought the tunnel experience impacted her worldview. One lunchtime, I witnessed Lila Whitmore laugh and share snacks with a table of scholarship kids, making them feel important. It was hard to connect this sweet, attentive boy with the bus rider who said Eli probably didn't have a dad. The 7th grade class built a strong culture of inclusiveness and supporting one another as the year progressed. They chastised each other for classist comments or exclusions. I saw them aggressively engage everyone in activities and chats during recess. Eli's friends instantly asked her to lunch and included her in their weekend plans when a mid-year scholarship student transferred. That tunnel taught the youngsters something most people never learn: compassion and character matter more than money or prestige. They had witnessed Eli's kindness save them while the affluent parents provided nothing. This lesson stayed with them more than any classroom lecture. Other instructors noted that a 7th grade class without bullying or social hierarchy drama was rare. I knew it was because these students had been forced to evaluate their principals and select who they were. Eli was chosen to represent the school during an April district leadership meeting. The selection committee believed his heroism and charity amid the crisis typified the student leadership they wished to reward. His instructors recommended him. Eli was scared but delighted to present to hundreds of people. Several friends agreed to practice and critique his speech after school. In the library, I saw them give him honest advice and boost his confidence. Eli spoke on how the tunnel taught him that true leadership entails putting people first, even when you're terrified, unwell, or low on resources. He described how the other kids' companionship improved his life and made him feel valuable and significant. In his practice presentation, our class clapped for a minute and 3 kids cried. Eli discovered his voice and community, and witnessing him stand up and talk confidently was one of my finest moments as a student teacher. After getting my teaching credential in May, 3 districts offered me jobs within 2 weeks. Principal Lawson personally contacted to encourage me to apply for her school's next year position. She stated they needed instructors like me who knew education is more than test results and lesson plans. She said the tunnel event showed her I had the ethics and bravery to protect pupils even at my own expense, which were unusual and precious. She said the school valued my work and wanted me to stay. The greater salary and improved facilities made the other job offers appealing. But I kept thinking about Eli and his friends and how much I wanted to help them flourish. I accepted Principal Lawson's offer since I didn't want to teach elsewhere. I wanted to teach in a community that had shown they were eager to learn and improve for all pupils. In June, the school board recognized many tunnel responders and survivors at a public meeting. My actions during the collapse and my work designing the new volunteer training program earned me a Community Service Award from Thomas Keller at the front of the room. He delivered a brief speech on how I showed moral bravery under terrible circumstances and kept serving the community by preventing future student prejudice. I noticed Eli in the 3rd row with his classmates clapping loudly and gave me thumbs up as the audience applauded. Maria Parker sat alongside him crying, while Mark Sullivan grinned and clapped a few seats back. Some parents who backed Mrs. Whitmore in the tunnel were cheering, clearly thrilled with the acknowledgement. A glass plaque with my name was the reward. However, seeing that room full of people who understood why I did what I did and backed my decision to stand up for a youngster who needed someone was more important. Over the next 2 weeks, town heard about the tunnel incident. Mrs. Whitmore ceased attending school functions. Her pals stopped calling. Parents who used to drink coffee with her changed their minds. Another teacher told me she had taken her daughter out of school and relocated to a place an hour and a half away, where no one knew what she did. Some muttered that they felt sorry for her. Everyone makes errors under pressure. Most people felt she caused it by never apologizing or saying she was wrong about how she handled Eli throughout the crisis. The school rapidly carried on without her. 3 weeks after the rescue, Principal Lawson brought me into her office. A job offer letter was on her desk. I could teach next year if I wanted. She asked me because I had the moral leadership that produces outstanding teachers, those who always safeguard their children. The papers was signed the same day. The other employment offers paid more and had newer structures, but this community was eager to grow and change, which mattered most. Our 7th grade end-of-year celebration was in the gym on Friday afternoon. Parents crowded the bleachers as youngsters sat in folding chairs facing a tiny stage. Eli approached the microphone frightened, yet determined. Friends helped him practice his speech for weeks. He described the tunnel collapse and his fear when he got sick. He said sharing his meal was right even if he was hungry. Then he uttered what caused half the crowd to cry. He thanked everyone who defended him when Mrs. Whitmore requested his rations. He said he learned that true friendship includes sticking up for others even when it's hard and that compassion counts more than money, parents, or neighborhood. The gym was hushed as he talked. Eli finished and moved away from the microphone, and every 7th grader stood up and clapped. Mom and Dad stood up. In the 3rd row, Lila Whitmore wiped tears from her cheeks while clapping harder than anybody. Students changed drastically from that bus journey to now. They defended Eli with everything they had after mocking his shoes. I felt proud knowing I helped them improve even somewhat. Maria Parker threw an end-of-year party at their flat the following Saturday. All Eli's new pals and their families were invited. I anticipated 5 or 6 attendees. 25 individuals filled that modest living room. Rich parents who looked down on Eli's neighborhood ate handmade tamales and laughed on the couch. Kids went about playing hallway games. Eli was in the midst, beaming larger than ever. His mom kept restocking food dishes and thanking guests. Nobody cared about the ancient dwelling and outdated furniture. They were just glad to celebrate Eli and the connections that built from something so horrific. I was grabbing extra napkins when Carlos Ramirez called me into the kitchen. He said Maria wept for nearly an hour when the first playdate invitation arrived. She feared for years that Eli would be lonely since they couldn't afford other things. He stated the tunnel collapse worried him more than ever. The aftermath provided Eli something he never had before: true friends who appreciated him for who he was, a community that valued him, and a place to belong. The harrowing days in the dark tunnel were worth it as Eli laughed with his classmates in the living area. School finished on a Tuesday in early June. Last week, I thought about how 4 days in a collapsing tunnel altered this town. 12 students might benefit from the scholarship fund next year. New volunteer procedures prevented youngsters from being treated like Eli. A group of 7th graders developed empathy without a school lecture. Choosing compassion above brutality was demonstrated to them. They saw how a poor person's charity saved lives. They learnt that doing the right thing is more important than fitting in. They never forgot those teachings. I prepared for my first year as a full instructor in July. Principal Lawson phoned to say I'd teach 8th grade, bringing Eli and his friends back. I could encourage their progress. Planning classes and arranging my classroom took weeks. I was delighted and terrified every time I entered the vacant room with my name on the door. Indeed, this was happening. Being a genuine teacher with my own pupils and classroom was my goal. Eli visited my classroom after 7th grade. He gave me a card from all his pals. A light-filled tunnel was drawn on the front. Eli wrote that I taught him to stand up for himself. That genuine instructors defend all children, not just the wealthy or easy. Having someone to support you in tough times makes all the difference. I kept that card in my desk drawer for daily viewing. 4 years after our tunnel disaster, the town organized a memorial service for a previous collapse that killed 3 workers. Our group was asked to discuss survival and strength. Eli rose first, taller and more assured. He taught that courage is assisting others while you're terrified. Next, some of his students shared how the experience taught them to recognize people's character beyond money and rank. Mark Sullivan describes seeing youngsters become heroes at night. I mentioned human generosity under strain and how disaster reveals people's true selves. Nearly 180 individuals listened silently. We completed to lengthy applause. Parent after parent thanked us for sharing our experience. They believed the tunnel made their kids more loving, less materialistic, and more motivated to fight injustice. Maria Parker stood with Carlos Ramirez and watched her son shake hands and spoke to people who ignored him. That fearful, lonely youngster from the bus front was gone. The young man in his place recognized his worth and had people who respected him. If individuals learn from bad things, they can improve. Parents approached me one by one after the wedding. The mother of a bus passenger who mocked Eli clutched my hand tightly. She told me her daughter talks differently now and observes when people are left out at school and spent her birthday money on supplies on a classmate who couldn't afford them. Another dad claimed his son stopped asking for fancy sneakers and started helping at the food bank. While thanking you, their voices trembled as they revealed how terrible those 4 days were and how thankful they were that anything good resulted from it. One woman sobbed while telling that her kids stood up to a bully last month because Eli taught them that individuals matter more than popularity. I listened to tale after story of youngsters who saw past money and prestige, became bolder and nicer, and chose empathy over cruelty. I saw daily changes the year after the collapse. Winter saw Eli's grades rise from just passing to honor. His instructors drew me aside during planning times to tell me he now participates in every topic, answers challenging questions, and volunteers to help struggling students with arithmetic. He joined the student council and created a lunch buddy program for lonely youngsters with older students. I saw him smiling at jokes and planning weekend hangouts in corridors with buddies. The nervous youngster who ate lunch alone in the library was gone. My teaching career took off unexpectedly. Principal Lawson brought me into her office one morning to inform me 4 new teachers wanted to watch my classroom. They heard I made every student feel cherished and protected and created a culture where students supported each other instead of tearing each other down. I was invited to speak at a district conference on inclusive classrooms and crisis management. Other schools copied our volunteer training program. Parents wanted their children in my class because they trusted me to treat everyone equally, regardless of income. I now understand teaching thanks to those 4 days in darkness. It goes beyond lesson plans, test results, and curricular requirements. It's about demonstrating kids' bravery in difficult and terrifying situations via your decisions. Proof that every student deserves safety, respect, and kindness, no matter what. Eli discovered his tribe and voice. These 7th graders learnt empathy that transformed them. I realized I needed to be a teacher who never turned away a child in need and speaks up even when strong people tell me to be silent.